The sun had barely risen when I wheeled my small black suitcase across the Miami marina, the wheels rattling against the uneven wooden planks. The air was thick with salt, warm already, though it was only 7 in the morning and seagulls screamed overhead as if they sensed something about to break. I could see the gleaming yacht from a distance, the one my husband's family called the Preston Star, polished so brightly that the hull seemed to glow white against the blue water. My pulse quickened half from nerves, half from anger. This was supposed to be the annual Collins family yacht trip, a tradition that stretched back decades a week of champagne toasts, catered meals, and smug laughter at sea. I had been there every single year since marrying Daniel. Except this year, things were different. When I reached the dock entrance, a young staffer in a pressed white polo stopped me clipboard in hand. He smiled politely, but with the stiffness of someone about to deliver bad news. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, flipping through the manifest. "Your name isn't on the guest list for today's trip." For a second, I thought he was joking. I tilted my head, waiting for him to laugh, but the seriousness in his brown eyes didn't waver. Heat surged through my body so fast and so sharp I could taste copper at the back of my tongue. "Check again." I said, my voice quieter than I meant, because something inside me already knew this wasn't a mistake. He ran his finger down the list again, then shook his head. "No, ma'am. Collins family only. I can't let you aboard." The words hit harder than I expected. Collins family only. As if I, Marjorie Collins, 38 years old, wife of Daniel for 12 years, wasn't family at all. As if I had been erased from my own marriage, my own history with the stroke of a pen. Behind him, laughter floated down from the deck. I recognized the shrill, satisfied voice instantly. Valora, my sister-in-law, draped in silk and sunglasses even this early holding court at the top of the gangway. I could see the flash of her red dress, the tilt of her glass as she sipped orange juice already laced with champagne. She turned her head, and for a moment our eyes locked. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. My stomach tightened. She had done this. She had erased me. The staffer shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us, clearly sensing tension he didn't want to get caught in. "Maybe you can call your husband," he offered, lowering his voice. "Sometimes they forget to add a spouse." I almost laughed. Forget! No, this wasn't forgetfulness. This was deliberate. The night before, I had scrolled through social media through perfectly filtered posts from Valora, tagging everyone in the family but me. A slow burn of dread had filled my chest, and now here it was, confirmed in broad daylight. "My name should be there," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew arguing with him was pointless. He was just a staffer following orders. The humiliation wasn't his fault. The betrayal was higher blood-bound. A breeze picked up, tugging at my hair, carrying the scent of diesel fuel from the boats and the faint perfume from Valora's ridiculous cloud of fragrance. The sun reflected off the water so sharply that it seared my eyes, and for one suspended moment, I felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching myself be diminished, erased, while people who should have been my family laughed above me. I clenched the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. This was no mistake. I had been banned. Banished from the yacht, I had poured my savings into the yacht I had sacrificed years of work to secure, the yacht Daniel and I were supposed to treat as our shared legacy. And now I was left on the dock, staring up at my sister-in-law's satisfied smirk, while a stranger with a clipboard told me I wasn't even on the list. My voice trembled as I forced out words, not for him, not for Valora, not even for Daniel, but for myself. "They think I don't belong here." My chest tightened, breath shallow, but inside something flickered dangerous and alive. It wasn't just humiliation coursing through me, it was rage. It was resolve. They thought they had erased me, but they had no idea what was coming. Before the dockside humiliation, before the laughter that sliced through me like a blade, my life looked deceptively ordinary. Our home in Charleston stood proud on a quiet street lined with oak trees, Spanish moss draped low like lace curtains. The mornings were slow and golden, with the sound of church bells in the distance, and the smell of fresh coffee filling our kitchen. I often worked from the sunroom, where sketches of my architectural projects lay scattered across the table, traced with the faint marks of graphite and my own fingerprints. To anyone passing by, we were the picture of stability. Daniel, my husband of 12 years, a successful financial advisor with a calm, easy smile. Me, an architect with a modest but growing practice, proud of the homes I had designed, proud of the sweat I had poured into every beam and every roofline. We looked like a team, and for a long time, I believed we were. Even with the cracks that showed in small ways, Daniel coming home later, his voice tired, his texts shorter, there was comfort in routine. I made dinner most nights, carefully plating meals on the white dishes we had received at our wedding. He liked salmon roasted with lemon and dill. He liked his wine, chilled his shirts pressed. I gave him all of it without question, believing that's what a wife does. Believing that loyalty would be repaid in kind. And there was the family, the Collins clan. They liked to imagine themselves as Charleston royalty with their summer house on Kiowa Island and their carefully curated traditions. Every year the yacht trip was their crown jewel. We would gather on the Preston Star Set, sail from Miami to the Keys, and spend a week basking in luxury as if it were birthright. The clinking of crystal glasses, the chatter of business deals whispered over lobster dinners, the photographs later splashed across social media to prove their supremacy. At first, I felt like an outsider. I came from a middle-class family, teachers, shopkeepers, people who measured success in steady jobs and paid off mortgages, not yachts and catered brunches. But I tried. I learned the rules of their world: always smile, never outshine. Valora laugh at jokes that weren't funny and let my achievements shrink into silence. Every time I shared about my projects, Valora would arch an eyebrow and say, "How quaint." Daniel would press his hand gently on my thigh under the table, signaling me to let it go. So I did. Still, there were moments of warmth. A few cousins who asked about my work, sincerely the shared laughter on deck under the stars, the feeling of the ocean wind against my skin. I clung to those pieces like driftwood, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, I was being welcomed in. Last year, I had stood at the yacht's rail beside Daniel, his arm around my waist, as fireworks exploded across the Miami sky. I remember thinking, this is it. This is belonging. My chest swelled with hope, with the belief that I was carving a place in their legacy, that my efforts and sacrifices weren't invisible. But belonging, I learned too late, had conditions. Conditions I would never truly meet, no matter how many meals I cooked, no matter how many smiles I forced, no matter how many hours I worked to help pay for that gleaming yacht they claimed as their own. From the outside, my life looked steady. Inside, it was a house of cards waiting for the right gust of wind, waiting for Valora's hand to topple it all. The first sign came a week before the yacht trip, late on a Tuesday night. I was sitting cross-legged on the living room couch, my laptop open to sketches for a client's new lake house. Daniel had gone upstairs early, claiming he was exhausted after a long day of client meetings. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy pressing down on your shoulders. I reached for my phone more out of distraction than anything else and scrolled through Instagram. That's when my stomach tightened. Valora's profile lit up my screen, her life curated like a glossy magazine spread. There she was at brunch with her friends, wearing oversized sunglasses, holding up a mimosa. The caption read, "Countdown to Collins Yacht Week. The tradition lives on. Family only. Can't wait for the sea breeze and sunshine." The comments gushed in response. "So glamorous. Wish I was part of your family." My thumb hovered over the photo, frozen. Family only. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe it was just a careless phrase. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. I set my phone down, tried to return to my sketches, but my hands shook and the pencil lines blurred. Something gnawed at me, a quiet dread that refused to be soothed. 2 days later, the dread solidified. My phone buzzed with a notification, a message from the Collins family group chat. Normally, the thread was filled with logistical chatter, catering options, weather updates, dress codes Valora insisted upon. I opened it casually, expecting the usual. But as my eyes scanned the screen, my chest constricted. Valora, final headcount for Yacht Mom, Dad Daniel Me Gregg, his wife, the twins, Aunt Lydia, Uncle Rob. That's 9, confirm with staff. My name wasn't there, not even as an afterthought. I scrolled up, hoping maybe she had mentioned me in an earlier message. Nothing. My throat went dry. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. They had made a list. They had counted heads, and I wasn't part of it. I typed quickly, my fingers trembling. "Valora, you forgot me." For a moment, there was silence. Then the dots appeared her typing. Valora! Oh, Marjorie! This year is just immediate family. Keeps things simple. Less drama that way. Less drama. The words landed like a slap. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Immediate family. Less drama. As if I were an accessory that could be left behind to lighten the load. Daniel's name popped up next. Daniel, don't worry about it, Marge. We'll talk later. Later. Always later. Always brushed aside. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I sat frozen, the glow of the phone screen burning into my face, while upstairs my husband slept soundly, leaving me to drown in the humiliation alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, the words looping in my head. Immediate family. Less drama. My hand rested on my stomach, trying to steady my breathing, but the ache inside grew heavier. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Daniel would fix it. Maybe he would stand up, tell them it was unacceptable. But when I asked him over coffee, his response shattered the last thread of hope. Valora just wants a peaceful trip, he said, adjusting his tie, not even meeting my eyes. You know how she gets. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. My voice cracked. She erased me from the family list, Daniel. Do you understand what that feels like? He sighed, kissed the top of my head like I was a child throwing a tantrum, and walked out the door. The silence that followed was deafening. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just oversight. This was exile deliberate and cruel. And if they thought I would accept it quietly, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The morning after Daniel brushed me off with that infuriating kiss to the top of my head, I tried again. I thought maybe if I sat him down face to face without the distraction of work or family expectations, he would finally hear me. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the blinds, the smell of coffee still thick in the air. I looked straight at him, my voice steady even as my heart raced. Daniel, do you really think it's acceptable for Valora to cut me out, for her to say I'm not family? He exhaled sharply, shaking his head like I was the one who didn't understand. Marge, you're overreacting. Valora's stressed. She's handling all the logistics for this trip, and you know how she can be. It's just easier if you sit this one out. Easier. For who? Certainly not for me. My chair scraped against the tile as I stood up, heat rushing through me. Sit this one out. This isn't a school play, Daniel. This is our family trip. My family, too. But he didn't flinch. He just reached for his phone, scrolling through emails as if my words were background noise. That was the first cut. The second came when his mother called. I recognized the clipped tone of Evelyn Collins the moment I answered. Marjorie, dear, she said, syrupy but cold. I hope you're not making things harder for Valora. She's under so much pressure organizing this trip. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my jaw aching. She excluded me, Evelyn. She erased me from the list like I don't exist. A pause, then a sigh that felt rehearsed. Sometimes it's better to step back to avoid unnecessary tension. Valora is fragile, you know that. Fragile? I nearly laughed. Valora was about as fragile as a diamond blade, sharp, unyielding, designed to cut. But Evelyn had spoken her piece, and the line went quiet. Later that evening, Daniel's father chimed in. Over dinner, he leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon as if we were discussing a stock tip rather than my dignity. Marjorie Richards said, "You've got to let these things go. It's one trip. Don't make it a bigger deal than it is." His voice carried that finality, the weight of a patriarch whose word was law. My fork clattered against the plate, and I stared at him wondering how people could dismiss cruelty so casually, how exile could be reduced to just one trip. The isolation grew heavier each day. Messages from cousins that used to include me now skipped over my name entirely. In the family chat, no one responded when I wrote a single line, "I don't deserve this." The screen stayed blank, dots never appeared. Silence stretched on. I was shouting into a void, and the void swallowed me whole. That night, I stood on our back porch, the cicadas screaming in the humid Charleston air. My reflection in the glass door looked unfamiliar, eyes too. Wide, lips pressed tight, shoulders hunched with tension. I whispered to myself because no one else seemed to listen. I am not invisible. I will not be erased. Inside, Daniel was already asleep, his body turned away from my side of the bed. That image, his back, his silence, his refusal to shield me, hurt more than Valora's words ever could. It told me everything I needed to know. I was alone in this fight. Alone in a family that had decided my seat at their table was conditional, revocable, disposable. Gaslighting works slowly like water eroding stone. They made me question my worth, my sanity, my very right to belong. But as the weight of their silence pressed harder, something inside me hardened too. If they wanted me gone, they would see the cost of underestimating me. They would see that the woman they pushed aside still had weapons left, truth, evidence, and the power they thought was theirs alone. The night after Evelyn's call, I found myself standing alone in my office, surrounded by stacks of blueprints and design sketches, the tools of the career I had built brick by brick. But tonight, it wasn't houses or renovations that consumed me. It was survival. The Collins family had drawn a line, and I had to decide whether to step back in shame or arm myself with proof of who I really was. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one Daniel never touched, and slid out a thick black folder labeled Preston Star. Inside were years of receipts, contracts, and bank statements, each page marked with my handwriting, each one a testament to sacrifices I had made. I spread them across the desk, my fingers shaking as I flipped through them. There was the down payment receipt, a check written from my own business account 8 years ago. Money I had earned designing 3 homes back-to-back with no weekends off. I remembered the exhaustion the way my hands had cramped from drawing late into the night, but also the thrill of wiring those funds. That yacht wasn't a gift from the Collins family. It was a piece of me carved from years of effort they had never once acknowledged. Next came the maintenance bills. I traced the ink with my fingertips, thousands of dollars for engine overhauls, for new navigation systems, for upholstery repairs. All charged to me. Daniel had promised we would split those expenses, but time and again I covered them because he forgot or had other investments tied up. And I had let it slide, believing his words, believing that in marriage what's his is mine, and what's mine is his. But staring at the cold numbers, I saw the truth. What was mine had always been theirs for the taking. I pulled out the legal contract, the one I had insisted on drawing up after the purchase. My name wasn't just on it. My name was first holding 70% ownership of the Preston Star. The ink was faded, but the letters were still sharp, undeniable. 70%, more than half, majority. The power they assumed was theirs to grant or withhold had legally been mine all along. I set the papers aside and reached for my phone. My thumbs moved quickly, photographing each document, saving them in a hidden folder, then emailing them to my personal account just in case. Each click of the camera felt like loading bullets into a chamber. These were my weapons. Not fists, not screams, but truth pressed into paper and ink. Around midnight, I dragged the small home printer closer the machine, whirring as it spit out crisp copies of every page. The sound filled the silence of the house, louder than it should have been echoing in my chest, like a war drum. The soft glow of the desk lamp lit the documents in golden light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than humiliation. I felt control. I stacked the papers neatly into a leather portfolio, slid it into my suitcase, and zipped it shut. My hands lingered on the zipper, trembling not from fear, but from anticipation. I pictured Valora's face when the truth came out, when the staff she barked orders at turned their attention to me with respect. I pictured Daniel's silence shattering under the weight of evidence he could no longer deny. I walked to the window, pulling the curtains open to the Charleston night. The cicadas hummed the stars faint against the city glow, and I pressed my palm flat against the cool glass. "You think you've erased me?" I whispered into the dark. "But I've kept every receipt, and receipts don't lie." The words steadied me. This wasn't just about a seat at their table anymore. This was about reclaiming what I had built, what they had stolen piece by piece with their dismissals and their silence. The yacht wasn't theirs to gatekeep, it was mine. And in just a few days they would see what it meant to banish a woman who held the power all along. Long before the betrayal, before Valora's cruel smile at the top of the yacht's gangway, there was the dream. I was 26, fresh in my career. Every dollar I earned stretched thin between rent, student loans, and the endless supplies an architect needs to survive. But I worked harder than anyone I knew. While my friends spent weekends at bars, I spent mine at drafting tables, my wrists aching, my eyes red from squinting at measurements until dawn. Each paycheck I set aside a fraction, whispering to myself one day. Daniel had been the one to suggest a yacht. Back then, the word felt impossible extravagant, but he painted a picture of legacy of family summers that would bind us together, of children yet unborn who would grow up with salt in their hair and stories of adventure at sea. I had smiled, my heart swelling with hope. A yacht, I repeated, almost laughing. But I believed him. I wanted that future too. We toured marinas up and down the coast, our weekends filled with the smell of diesel and varnish, the creak of gangways beneath our feet. When we found the Preston Star, she wasn't the gleaming beauty she is now. She was weathered, tired, her paint chipped and her engines groaning. But I saw something in her lines, the way her bow cut through the water even in the harbor. She was potential. She was ours. Daniel hesitated too much, work, too much money, but I pressed forward. I worked 3 contracts at once, designing a row of townhouses during the day, sketching a beachfront property at night, and consulting on a renovation project in between. I lived on caffeine and adrenaline, collapsing into bed beside him at 2 in the morning, only to rise again at 6. Every invoice paid, I set aside another chunk for the down payment. The day we signed the purchase papers, Daniel had his family with him. His parents beamed. Valora smirked, and there I was, the outsider whose name they pretended to celebrate. They toasted with champagne, calling it a Collins legacy. But I remember the sting of sweat on my back, the ache in my hands, and the knowledge that the majority of the money came from me. I remember thinking, this isn't legacy, this is labor. My labor. Over the years, while they bragged about their yacht, I poured myself into making her shine. I spent weekends scrubbing the decks until my knuckles bled, choosing fabrics for the cabins, overseeing contractors when the hull needed repair. They showed up only for the parties, the photo opportunities, the glasses of champagne raised against the Miami sunset. Valora, in particular, loved to claim credit. Our family yacht, she would purr her arm draped over the rail as if her presence had paid the bills. She never saw the invoices, never stayed up nights with me worrying about whether we could afford the next repair. She dismissed me with a wave as though my sacrifices were trivial. And Daniel, my partner, the man who promised to share the burden, slipped into silence. He allowed them to erase me bit by bit. He never corrected Valora when she bragged. He never reminded his parents that it was my name first on the contract, that I owned 70%. He let them build a myth around the Collins family legacy, a myth written on my back. Now, standing in my office with the folder of documents, I felt the past collide with the present. Every sleepless night, every dollar I scraped together, every line I had drawn on paper had led to that yacht. It wasn't their legacy. It wasn't Valora's birthright. It was the monument of my efforts stolen in plain sight. And if they wanted to call it family only, then I would show them the truth. Family didn't buy the Preston Star. I did. The night before the trip, I stood alone in our bedroom, the glow from the vanity mirror casting harsh light across my face. For a long time, I just stared at my reflection, at the dark circles under my eyes, the faint crease lines that had deepened these past weeks. I didn't see weakness anymore, though. I saw steel. My lips trembled at first, then firmed into a line. I whispered to myself the words barely audible but heavy with intent. No more tears. No more begging for a seat at their table. Watch. Don't react yet. I opened the suitcase on the bed, folding clothes with deliberate precision. A pale linen dress, flat shoes for walking the dock, a blazer in case the night air turned cool. Beside them, I slipped the leather portfolio filled with my documents into the suitcase's inner pocket, zipping it shut with care as though it were a weapon I needed to sheath. The sound of the zipper echoed louder than it should have, final and certain. In the silence of the room, I felt Daniel's absence more than ever. He was downstairs pacing through emails, pretending the world was normal. He hadn't asked me to join him for dinner. He hadn't asked what I was packing. He hadn't asked if I was okay. His silence told me everything I could not rely on him to fight this battle. I stepped closer to the mirror, studying myself like a stranger. For years, I had shrunk in Valora's shadow, allowed her smirks and sly remarks to chip away at me. I had silenced my voice to keep Daniel comfortable to avoid the Collins family storms, but that silence had cost me my dignity, and if there was one thing I would not lose, it was that. On the dresser sat a framed photo of us from a past yacht trip, me in a sundress, Daniel with his arm lazily draped over my shoulder, Valora in the background holding a flute of champagne, her smile wide and commanding. I picked it up, studied it for a moment, then set it face down. That woman in the photo had believed acceptance was just around the corner. She had believed loyalty would be repaid. That woman was gone. I pulled out a small notebook from my purse, one I used for client notes, and scribbled a line in bold black ink across the first page, "I will not be erased." The letters looked jagged, urgent, almost violent, but they steadied my breathing. This was my reminder, my vow. I slid the notebook into my handbag, then sat on the edge of the bed staring at the closed suitcase. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear this time. It was anticipation, the kind that coils in your gut when you know you are walking toward a storm and you are ready to let it break. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a smile. It wasn't wide, it wasn't warm, but it was sharp. "You want a show, Valora?" I whispered into the empty room. "You'll get one." Outside, the Charleston night pressed against the windows, heavy and humid. I could hear the faint buzz of cicadas, the low hum of passing cars, life moving forward as if nothing had shifted. But inside me, everything had changed. I closed the suitcase, placed it upright by the door, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be their stage. Tomorrow, the Collins family would see the woman they thought they had banished. And tomorrow, I would remind them in front of everyone that power was never theirs to grant or deny. It had always been mine. The Miami sun was already blazing when I arrived at the marina, the air thick with salt and heat. The Preston Star loomed ahead, its polished hull glinting like a blade under the morning light. My suitcase rattled across the dock, each thud of its wheels keeping rhythm with the pounding in my chest. Around me, families in linen and straw hats posed for photos, champagne flutes already in hand. And there, right at the gangway of the yacht, was Valora. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a glossy magazine spread red silk dress flowing in the breeze. Oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, her lips painted the color of fresh blood. She stood at the top of the steps as though she were queen of the sea, issuing directions to the crew with sharp flicks of her hand. When she saw me, her posture shifted ever so slightly. The corner of her mouth lifted in a smirk that made my stomach twist. "Well," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I thought I made it clear. Family only." The words floated down the gangway, casual and cutting at the same time. Conversations around us faltered. A few cousins glanced at each other awkwardly while Daniel stood several feet behind Valora. His arms crossed his face, pale. He didn't move toward me. He didn't say a word. A staff member in a crisp white uniform stepped forward, clipboard in hand. His voice was polite but uncertain. "Name, ma'am." "Marjorie Collins," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. He scanned the list, his brows knitting. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins. Your name doesn't appear on the manifest. I was told to admit Collins family only." Laughter rippled from the deck. I didn't need to look to know it came from Valora. She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Don't take it personally, Marjorie. It's better this way. Less tension." Heat rose up my neck, but I refused to flinch. The humiliation was sharp, yes, but beneath it surged something else. Rage, resolve, a calm that was almost terrifying. I straightened my shoulders, meeting the staffer's gaze. "Check again," I said softly. He hesitated, glanced at Valora, then back at the list. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to hum in the air like an electrical current. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Actually," his voice carried louder now. "Mrs. Collins, welcome aboard. Hi aboard, owner." The words rang out like a gunshot. For a split second, everything froze. The cousins stared. The crew shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's head dropped as though the weight of those words had broken him. And Valora, her smirk shattered. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped forward, the wheels of my suitcase clicking sharply against the wood. "That's right," I said, my voice firm. "Owner." The staffer handed me the clipboard, and I flipped it open. My name wasn't on the guest manifest, but at the top of the ownership contract, tucked neatly in the file, there, it was Marjorie Collins, 70% majority shareholder. I held it up, the sunlight catching on the ink. You erased my name from the guest list, but you can't erase it from here. Murmurs rippled across the deck. Phones appeared in hands, cameras recording. Someone whispered, "She owns it." Another said, 70%. Did you hear that? The scandal spread like wildfire, and Valora's composure began to crack. This is ridiculous, she snapped, stepping forward. Some clerical error. She doesn't understand. I cut her off with a smile that felt sharper than any blade. What I understand is that you tried to exile me from my own yacht. You made me invisible in front of everyone. But the thing about Truth Valora is that it doesn't vanish because you want it to. It stands, just like these receipts. I pulled the leather portfolio from my bag, flipping it open with deliberate slowness. Copies of bank statements, repair invoices, the original down payment, all bearing my name. I laid them out on the small table at the dock, each page fluttering in the warm wind like a flag of war. The silence was suffocating. Then one of the younger cousins let out a low whistle. Damn, he muttered. She really does own it. Valora's face flushed crimson beneath her sunglasses. She reached for Daniel, but he didn't move. He stood still, frozen in the wreckage of his own cowardice. I took a deep breath, the salt air filling my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt tall. Not because of their approval, not because of Daniel's silence, but because I had chosen to stand. Now I said, turning back to the staffer, "Please carry my suitcase aboard. I'll take my seat." He nodded quickly, lifting it with a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." As I stepped onto this gangway, Valora stumbled back, her red silk dress twisting in the breeze like a warning flag. Her empire of control had cracked in front of the very audience she had sought to impress. And me, I walked past her without flinching, my heels striking the deck with a rhythm that sounded like victory. Valora's laugh came first brittle and too loud, the kind that cracks at the edges. She tugged her sunglasses down to perch on her nose, revealing eyes that darted wildly from face to face as though searching for an ally. "Everyone, don't be ridiculous," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. Marjorie must be confused. "We've always treated this yacht as family property." She's exaggerating, she always does. But no one laughed with her. The cousins exchanged glances, their expressions caught somewhere between discomfort and dawning recognition. Aunt Lydia, who had always played neutral, leaned closer to Uncle Rob and whispered something sharp. Phones were still up screens, glowing, recording every second. The more Valora protested, the more her words tangled, the less control she seemed to hold. I stepped onto the deck, my presence alone a silent rebuke. The staff member who had welcomed me earlier stood straighter now, his respect palpable. Behind me, 2 crewmen wheeled my suitcase aboard without hesitation. Their quiet efficiency carried more weight than any speech. Valora reached out suddenly, fingers clawing at Daniel's arm. "Say something," she hissed, her voice harsh and frantic. "Tell them she doesn't understand how these things work. Tell them it's all a mistake." But Daniel didn't move. He stared at the deckboards beneath his shoes, shame etched into the slump of his shoulders. His silence was louder than her pleas. I opened my portfolio again, holding up the ownership contract so the family could see the signatures. "There's no mistake," I said evenly. 70% belongs to me. Every major repair, every upgrade, every cent poured into keeping this yacht afloat, it's mine. You've all enjoyed it for years, but don't confuse enjoyment with ownership. Gasps rippled through the group. One of the twins, barely 20, muttered under his breath. 70%. Damn. Valora's composure fractured completely. She lunged forward, snatching at the papers in my hand, but I stepped back, easily lifting them higher. The sudden movement drew a sharp warning from the staffer. "Ma'am, please," he said firmly, positioning himself between us. "Respect the owner's documents." Owner. The word sliced through the air like a bell toll. Valora froze her hand, still raised in midair. For the first time, the power she had wielded for so long slipped visibly from her grasp. Her fingers trembled as she lowered them, her jaw working soundlessly. Her carefully constructed image, the silk dress, the red lipstick, the queenly stance, looked suddenly cheap, like theater props under a harsh spotlight. I was just trying to make things easier," she stammered, but her voice cracked. Family traditions can get complicated. I never meant I cut in my voice sharper than I intended. You erased me from messages told Daniel to pacify me, announced to the world that this trip was family only. Don't stand there and pretend it was an accident. You knew exactly what you were doing. Her cheeks burned red. She turned to Evelyn, her mother, desperate. Mom, tell them! But Evelyn's face had paled, her pearl necklace trembling against her throat as she whispered, Valora, what have you done? The weight of the moment pressed down, suffocating. Valora's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. Around us, family members pulled back the invisible circle she had commanded for years, collapsing in on her. Even the cousins who once laughed at her cruel jokes now avoided her gaze, their eyes fixed firmly on the deck or their phones. The queen of the Collins family had been dethroned not with shouting or fists, but with a few sheets of paper and the undeniable truth. I tucked the documents back into my portfolio, snapped it shut, and let the silence linger. Every second of it was a verdict, every averted gaze a sentence. Finally, I said quietly but firmly, this yacht was never your stage, Valora. And today, everyone saw that for themselves. The silence that followed was deeper than humiliation. It was collapse. The yacht pulled away from the dock with a low groan, the water churning white behind us. Normally, departure was a spectacle. Champagne corks popping cousins clinking glasses. Valora orchestrating laughter loud enough for the marina to hear. But this time, silence spread across the deck like a heavy fog. The only sounds were the gulls overhead and the steady churn of the engines. I sat near the stern, my leather portfolio resting on my lap like a shield. The staff moved quietly, their eyes lowered, but their respect clear in every careful Mrs. Collins they uttered. The words carried weight reverberating each time they addressed me, puncturing the silence. No one dared challenge them. Valora had retreated to a lounge chair, sunglasses pulled low again, though the trembling in her hands gave her away. Her red silk dress no longer looked regal. It clung to her like a costume from a play that had ended badly. She held her mimosa untouched, staring out at the horizon as if pretending hard enough might make the scene vanish. Daniel sat a few feet away from me, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. For 12 years, I had searched his silence for protection, for comfort, for solidarity. Today, it revealed itself for what it truly was, cowardice. His loyalty had evaporated in the heat of his sister's manipulation, and now he had nothing left to give but shame. Around us, the family shifted uneasily. Evelyn fiddled with her pearls until the strand nearly snapped. Richard nursed his bourbon, staring into the glass as though it could offer answers. The cousins whispered among themselves, their voices low, but not low enough to hide words like 70% owner and how did we not know? Dinner was served that evening in the main salon. Normally, the first night meal was a celebration. Lobster tails, champagne towers, Valora at the head of the table giving toasts about family legacy. But as we sat around the glossy mahogany table, the only legacy present was silence. Plates clinked softly, utensils scraping in the absence of chatter. I looked at the chair across from me, the one Valora had always claimed as her throne. Tonight she slouched in it, her lipstick faded, her eyes hidden. She didn't raise a glass. She didn't say a word. For once, her kingdom had deserted her. Daniel finally cleared his throat, the sound startling in the stillness. Marge. He began his voice low, almost pleading, but when I met his eyes, he faltered the words dying on his lips. He reached for my hand across the table, but I left it resting firmly in my lap. I had no interest in rescuing him from the silence he had chosen. The rest of the family ate in fragments, conversations half started and abandoned. No one wanted to be the first to break the spell, to acknowledge the truth still hovering like smoke over the table. They had built their image on appearances wealth unity control. But appearances crumble when receipts are laid bare. Later that night, I stepped onto the deck alone. The moon cast silver across the waves, the breeze tugging at my hair. For years, I had stood here feeling like a guest in my own story, begging for belonging. But tonight, with the ocean stretching endlessly before me, I felt something different. I felt tall, solid, whole. Behind me through the glass doors, I could see them still gathered in the salon, their faces grim, their words muffled. The Collins family empire had cracked not because I screamed or begged, but because I held up a mirror to the truth and made them see themselves. And truth once spoken aloud never goes back to silence. When the yacht trip ended, I walked off the gangway with my suitcase in one hand and the leather portfolio in the other. I did not look back. Valora trailed behind with her sunglasses back in place, her red dress wrinkled, her voice muted. Daniel followed in silence, his phone pressed to his ear, though I doubted anyone was really on the other end. The Collins family had arrived in Miami expecting another week of control and display. They left fractured, stripped of the illusion they had spent decades curating. But for me, the ending was only the beginning. 2 days later, I sat in my attorney's office. Denise Carter was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, the kind of lawyer who missed nothing. Her walls were lined with leather-bound books, her desk stacked with neat piles of case files. She flipped through my documents with deliberate precision, tapping each page as she read. Majority shareholder 70% every maintenance bill in your name. Marjorie, they've been using you, and worse, they've been erasing you. I knotted my throat tight. I want out. I want the finances clean. I want the yacht under my sole control. No more shared accounts, no more illusions of legacy. Her lips curved in a thin smile. That, my dear, is more than possible. That's inevitable. The process was meticulous. Denise filed the paperwork to dissolve my financial ties to Daniel. She uncovered how many times he had leaned on my accounts to cover family emergencies expenses that had nothing to do with us, but everything to do with keeping Valora's lifestyle afloat. She tracked transfers hidden under vague labels payments that had slipped by me during years of exhausted trust. When she laid the spreadsheet in front of me, the numbers hit like punches over $250,000 siphoned from me into the Collins family's orbit. But Denise didn't just point to the theft. She handed me the weapons to take it all back. With my majority stake, I had full legal right to remove Daniel from any claim on the Preston Star. The documents were clear. His signature was nothing more than a passenger pass. I signed the forms each stroke of the pen, a quiet act of liberation. Meanwhile, the fallout for Valora began to bloom like rot spreading through fruit. Videos of the confrontation at the dock had hit social media. Clips of the staffer saying, "High aboard owner" went viral, shared with gleeful captions like, "Queen dethroned," and "When receipts speak louder than family lies." Valora's carefully cultivated image as a society darling crumbled overnight. Clients pulled out of her boutique consulting business whispering about trust issues. Invitations to charity galas dried up, and the worst wound of all, her own parents could not look her in the eye. Daniel tried to repair the wreckage, but each attempt only deepened the cracks. He called me late at night, his voice hoarse, begging to meet. "We can fix this, Marge. We just need to move past it." "Move past?" I asked, my voice flat. "You stood there and let your sister erase me. You let your family call me less than, and you said nothing. You don't get to move past what you chose to watch." There was no anger left in my words, only clarity. He went silent as he always had. But this time his silence didn't bind me. It freed me. By the end of the month, the separation was filed. I reclaimed the yacht as my sole property, dissolved joint accounts, and cut off the pipelines of money that had flowed quietly into Colin's hands for years. The financial umbilical cord was severed, and with it the last tether holding me to their version of family. The day the court finalized the ownership, I stood on the deck of the Preston Star alone. The papers were fresh in my hand, the ink barely dry, but the weight of them settled over me like armor. The ocean stretched wide, limitless, no longer a stage for Valora's performances, but a canvas waiting for me. I looked out at the horizon, breathing deep the salt air. For years, they had convinced me my place was conditional, revocable, dependent on their acceptance. But the truth was carved into every page Denise had filed, into every dollar I had sacrificed. My place was never theirs to give. It had always been mine to claim. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was clean quiet, written in ink and law. And as the waves lapped against the hull, I knew the Collins family had finally learned a lesson they would never forget. Erase me once, and I'll rewrite the story with my own hand. The first weekend after the court order, I invited no family, no cousins, no Collins entourage. Instead, I walked down the dock with a group of children from a local shelter, their eyes wide as the Preston Star came into view. Some clutched backpacks, others clung to volunteers' hands, but all of them gasped in unison when they saw the gleaming yacht. "This is ours for today," one little boy asked, disbelief etched into every syllable. I bent down, smiling as the breeze lifted my hair. "Yes," I said softly, "this is yours." As the engines hummed and the yacht slid into open water, the sound of laughter replaced the silence that had weighed so heavily during that cursed family trip. Children raced across the deck, squealing with joy as staff handed out ice cream cones and life jackets. I stood at the railing, the wind whipping against my linen dress, and for the first time in months, my chest felt light. The yacht was no longer a weapon of exclusion, no longer a stage for Valora's arrogance. It was mine, and I had chosen to make it mean something. News of my decision spread quickly. Articles praised the architect turned yacht owner who opened her vessel for community outreach. Photos of children laughing on the deck replaced the viral clips of Valora's humiliation. For once, the Collins name was no longer attached to my narrative. My name was. My effort. My choice. Meanwhile, the Collins family unraveled. Daniel called once more, his voice breaking this time, stripped of the smooth confidence he had once wielded. "Marge, I made a mistake," he whispered. "I should have defended you. I see that now." His words were too late. Regret after silence is nothing but noise. I listened not out of hope, but out of closure, then hung up without another word. Some doors deserve to remain closed. Valora's downfall was slower but sharper. Her business collapsed within weeks as clients abandoned her. She issued public statements about miscommunication and family misunderstanding, but no one believed her. The image of her red dress whipping in the Miami breeze while the staffer called me owner had burned itself into the public consciousness. She could not control the narrative anymore. The Queen of Charleston society had lost her crown and she knew it. I heard from a cousin that she rarely left her home, now embarrassed to show her face. A part of me pitied her, but only a small part. She had written her own tragedy when she chose exclusion as her weapon. For me, healing came slowly in quiet rituals. Morning coffee on the deck with no one to sneer at me. Long evenings sketching designs in the sunroom, my pencils moving freely without the weight of Valora's judgment. Therapy sessions where I finally spoke the words I had buried for years, how it felt to be silenced, how it felt to question my worth, how it felt to beg for a seat at a table that had never been mine. My therapist asked me once, why not build your own table? And I realized I already had. The Preston Star, once a symbol of my erasure, had become my declaration. Each trip with the children, each partnership with local charities, each ripple of joy that spread from the deck into the community was proof that legacy is not about birthright. Legacy is built. With sweat, with sacrifice, with choice. One evening as the sun dipped low over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, I stood alone on the deck. The water stretched endless before me, the city skyline glowing faint in the distance. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because the Collins family had accepted me, they never would, but because I no longer needed them to. I thought of all the women watching the ones who had been erased in their own families, silenced at their own tables. I wanted them to hear this truth: you do not need their permission to exist. You do not need their invitation to matter. Build your own table. Write your own receipts. Stand on your own deck and claim the horizon as yours. And as the waves carried the Preston Star forward, I whispered into the wind, not for Valora, not for Daniel, not even for the Collins name that once haunted me, but for myself. I was never invisible. I was always the owner,